Hi there again. I hope you're doing amazing, staying awesome, and most importantly, making this day a beautiful one. Well, in this video, we're going to learn how to do cinematic color grading in Photoshop. Now, when it comes to cinematic color grading, the topic can be so vast and sometimes very misleading that it can be a complete mess in our minds. Because if you just go ahead and search cinematic color grading on Google or YouTube, you might come across bluish color grading style or orange and teal color grading, and only those are cinematic color grading. It's just not possible. There are about 400,000 movies all around the world. And all of those hundreds and thousands of movies have hundreds of different scenes, and all of those scenes have different style of color grading. So to categorize something as cinematic color grading can be very misleading, isn't it? So in this video, we will learn cinematic color grading, but in a different way. We will take snapshots from popular movies, we'll take 2 examples, and try to learn the approach of getting our color grading style to match that of the scene. I'm super excited to share with you this approach because we have already learned most of the techniques. Approach is the most important thing. Maybe we'll throw in a few new features and techniques that might have come across with Photoshop 2022. So without any further ado, let's get started. Back in the magical world of Photoshop, and by the way, we will also learn 2 interesting ways to add grain to your photos. One of them we might have covered slightly previously, but one is pretty new. So let's go ahead and start with this. We're going to match this image to an interesting scene, and I have just the right scenes for it. By the way, I've taken 2 references, both of them from Harry Potter. So because it's one of the movies which most people have watched, and even if you haven't, you know what it's about, even if it's just a little bit. Anyway, so let's just drag it and drop it and keep it at one side. Let's say I want to match the color grading of this lady sitting on the woods right here to that of Harry Potter, this scene. How do we go about this? First of all, we need to match the brightness and the contrast. Now, to be able to match the brightness and the contrast, we need to take away the colors momentarily so that the colors don't distract us. And how can we go about this? By simply creating a check layer, a luminosity check layer. So to do that, click on the adjustment layer icon. Let me just lower down the volume. Click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose solid color and choose any color with 0 saturation. So it can be white, it can be gray, black, anything, but the saturation has to be 0. Just keep that in mind. Hit OK. Now change the blend mode from normal to color. This takes away all of those colors. Now you might be asking, Unmesh, why didn't you use hue saturation and just take down the saturation? That's a different science. That's a different method. And by the way, there's a reason for it. Do you want to learn? All right, so this is a check layer which is more accurate and based on human perception. Let's say you had something like this. Let's say we had a gradient. Let's create a gradient to understand it. So on the right hand side, let's take bright yellow. All right, very bright, something like this. Keep in mind, the brightness is at 100. And on the left hand side, let's take red, bright red. Again, brightness is at 100. And now we're going to draw a gradient like this. Now, if you look at it by perception, it just definitely looks that the yellow is brighter than the red. But technically, both of them have the same brightness level, which is 100. If you create a hue saturation adjustment layer and decrease the saturation, it is a more technical representation and everything becomes gray. But that is not how human perception works, does it? That is why when we do it this way, we just create a gray layer or a just solid color adjustment layer with 0 saturation and change the blend mode to color. It shows the perception. Let's turn that on. In this case, yellow is brighter, red is darker. So this is perceptively more accurate. All right, now let's go ahead and first match the brightness and contrast. For that, first of all, you might have already guessed, we're going to create a curves adjustment layer. Again, we are using the techniques that we have already covered. We are just learning the approach here. All right, so click to create a curves adjustment layer. By the way, make sure that the curves adjustment layer is underneath the reference. All right, so we clicked on the adjustment layer icon and then chose curves. If you didn't catch that, I missed saying it. Anyway, now let's just zoom in and make sure we are matching it right. First of all, let's match in the background because the subject can be treated differently. So we're going to make the overall thing pretty dark like this. Now we are getting closer and closer, but as I make things dark, I notice that the dark areas are getting too dark. So what you can do is probably, first of all, there's a lot of space here. If you look, there's a lot of fading that's going on. So let's take away the fading first by taking the slider on the left to the right, just till right here, till the fading goes away. Now we can make things dark like this. Make sure all of it is matching. So it's mostly matching. All right, pretty good. And I feel that these rock areas are pretty bright. So you can take the hand right there, take it over the rocks and just darken that. Just take that as a point instead. All right. And these general areas we can just brighten overall. All right. I feel there needs to be more darkening, but less of it in the shadows. So I tend to create 2 layers. You can do it with 1, but then again, it's just more easy to see what each of them are doing. I usually tend to create more curves layers than creating one that does everything, because then you can track which one does what and also play with the opacity of each of them separately. All right, so with this one, I feel that this can go a little more darker. So I'm going to go here, click here, take it down. And now both of them are matching. Why don't we take it to the left-hand side and then try to match all the image? All right, so I stuck the curves properties to the left-hand side and now it just should work nicely. All right, so that's nice. And we can just add a little fade to the background by taking the leftmost point up. So you can just zoom in. See, there's a little fade. So I'm just going to try to match that. Not too high, a little bit so that it matches. There you go. Just taking a little bit high matches that with that of Harry Potter. Now the backgrounds are matching pretty nice, but the subject not as much. How about we take the subject away from all of this and we do the subject separately? All right. So for that, let's come back to the subject layer. You can just keep the subject layer turned on if you want, so that we can work on the selections. And then select any of these, the object selection tool, the quick selection tool, or the magic wand tool. And as you do that, at the top, you will see select subject with the later versions of Photoshop. You can also use the pen tool to make a selection, or any of your favorite selection tools. We have talked about selection in a completely different module, so you can check that out if you really need some polishing up on selections. But that's pretty much it. We don't need very fine selections here. That's fine. This would work. All right, let's turn on both of these, and you can just erase this particular area from both of these or one of these. That's up to you. So let's take the first one and make sure black is the foreground color. With the selection active and the mask selected, press Alt Backspace on Windows, Option Delete on a Mac. You can do the same with this one as well. So you can activate the selection. By the way, I let go of the selection. I shouldn't have. All right, let's come back to this layer. I pressed Control or Command Z or Z, however you pronounce it, to get back to the selection. Press Alt Backspace or Option Delete. That way it has been removed from the subject here as well. All right, let's turn on the check layer. Let's turn on Harry Potter so that we can see what it's doing. And let's work on the subject separately. So let's create a curves adjustment layer. And this time we only want the subject as a mask. So hold the Alt key or the Option key, click and drag and drop it right there. We are making a copy of that mask and we want just the opposite. So we will invert it, of course. Do you want to replace the layer mask? Of course, yes. And press Ctrl or Command I. Now with this, we'll try to match that with that of Harry Potter. At this point, we can move the reference a little closer and then just zoom in and try to match these two. All right, now let's come back to the curves adjustment layer. With the help of the hand, first of all, we'll match the highlights. The highlights are pretty much matching. For the dark areas, let's zoom in, and I'm going to move the Harry Potter down right here so that we can match it properly. All right, let's come back to the curves adjustment layer. Okay, and let's zoom in properly. And now let's do the rest. So the highlights are pretty much matching. We did that here. Okay, and these shadow areas needs to be corrected. They need to go a little darker. Okay, so overall, a little more adjustment needs to be done. All right, now we are getting closer. But there's too much contrast, I feel. And for the extreme dark areas, we can take it a little bit to the right hand side, because Harry Potter also has very dark hair. Even though the background is a little faded, he has that. So it's pretty much matching. How do you feel about this? This still needs an overall darkness. So let's create another curves adjustment layer. We can do it in the same, but it's just more convenient to do it in different layers. And we're just going to have the same mask here as well. And let's just darken the overall thing. Okay, and just brighten the shadows a bit. Okay, now it's matching pretty nicely. Look at Harry Potter and look at her face. Pretty nice, isn't it? Now we're gonna take Harry Potter at the top back again and look at the overall image. So we are getting closer, but I feel that the bottom part of the subject is very, very bright. So we might have to work on that. So for it, let's create one more curves adjustment layer and just copy the same mask here. And now we'll just focus on the bottom part of the subject. It's just standing out too much. So with the help of the hand, let's just sample right there and take it down. Okay. And also we want a little more brightness in the shadows. Okay. And possibly a little more darkness in the highlights. Okay, so we only wanted this in the bottom part of the image. Make sure all of it is matching pretty nicely. Sometimes what happens is that we go a little too extreme and it just doesn't match with that of the background. So make sure all of that is matching. All right, once that is matching and it's all dark and nice, you can just apply to the bottom area by just placing this curves adjustment layer in a group. That way you will have two masks for it. So with the curves adjustment layer selected, press Ctrl or Command G and create a mask for that group. Now in that mask, we're going to create a gradient, and let's take a gradient from black to white. And we don't want to apply it on the top part, so we'll start from black there, and it should be something like this. So there you go. Here's the before, here's the after. Let's try one more time. There you go. That's a little better. Look at the difference. Here's the before. It's all standing out too much. Here's the after. It's matching more nicely. Now that the brightness and contrasts are matched, it is time for us to match the colors. Now keep in mind, we can do it with curves and hue saturation, and we have learned all of those techniques in previous lessons. But this time we'll try something new. First of all, make sure everything is organized. So select the first adjustment, hold the shift key, select the last adjustment. Everything is selected, press Ctrl or Command G, and this was matching brightness and contrast. All right, now we can turn off the check layer, and as you can see, the colors are not matching. The colors are looking nice in both cases, but they're not matching. So how do we match it? Now this is the new way. You can use the curves or the hue saturation technique as well, but I'm just trying something. And you might have guessed it, this is something new, so it must be a new roll filter. So let's go ahead and create a stamp visible layer by pressing Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E. All right. This creates a merged layer of everything that is on the canvas. The problem with this one is that I've made a mistake. And the mistake is, if I turn off the Harry Potter layer, it's also merged into it. So what I should have done though is turn off the Harry Potter layer and then do it. Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E. All right. And now you can just turn it into a smart object if you wish. And this was for matching color. Go to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, hit OK, because whatever filter we apply, we need the ability to go back and change later. Let's go to Filter and then Neural Filters right here. And there's a new one, especially with Photoshop 2022. This has later been improved a lot. I think it's new with 2022, and that's called Color Transfer. Let's turn that on. And let's go to Custom, and we can select an image which we wanted to reference from. So you can either select an image from your computer or just have it open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it, this Harry Potter reference image right here, and then again, go back and apply it by going to Filter and Neural Filters. You can also locate an image in your computer, if that's convenient for you. Anyway, so let's turn on Color Transfer. Let's go to Custom, and this is reference1.png. This is Harry Potter. And let's see how it does. and it does a fantastic job. Now you can try lab, you can try RGB, see which one works better for you. And I'm just gonna leave it to RGB because we will work on the subject separately. And you can play with the saturation, how much of it you want. You can play with the hue, the brightness, all of that. I feel that everything, most of the things, if you don't look at the subject, most of the things are all right. And we're just gonna hit OK, make sure output to smart filter is checked. And there you go. Mostly it is matching. Let's turn on Harry Potter. And it's not definitely matching the subject. Now I have to admit, first of all, let's just take away the properties, that if you look at the clothes, they're probably matching a lot. Look at the whites, look at the grays. It's matching pretty nicely. They have become bluish in both the cases. But the skin tone is just not matching. Or in other words, we can say that the reds are not matching. So how do we take it away from the reds, but also at the same time keep it non-destructive? Now keep in mind, we are trying to take it away from the reds of the bright areas. So double click on the right hand side of the layer. We are going to use blend if. Regularly, we just use it this way. If you want to remove it from the bright areas, we can just move the slider on the right to the left and vice versa. However, we just want to remove the reds. So from the bright areas, so in the blend if drop down, let's choose reds and then do it. Have a look. It begins to get realistic. But again, this is very harsh. So hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on the slider to break it apart and take it all the way apart like this. And we are getting better. But still, we need some adjustments to be done. Also, I feel that the opacity is a bit too much. So let's decrease it to about possibly 82. We're going to keep it 82. All right. Now, let's work on the subject separately because the skin tone definitely does need to match. Not that much because Harry Potter has a different skin tone, but still. Okay. So let's create a hue saturation adjustment layer. All right. And now we will only target the subject, and for it we already have a subject mask, don't we? So if we open here, there you go, subject mask, hold the Alt key or the Option key, click and drag and drop it right over there. Replace layer mask, yes. So let's go here, and what we want to do, we want to just make it a little bluish. So we can check and colorize and make sure it's a little bluish like this. You can control the saturation and of course decrease the opacity. Not have too much of it, so that the skin tone looks all right. Have a look. It's beginning to match with that of Harry Potter. But then again, we have to keep in mind that we don't go too high. Probably at about 40% is where we want to be. Again, skin tones are different in this case. We don't want to match it exactly. All right. So if you want to match it exactly, you can go a little higher. Probably let's keep it at 44%. And then you can work with saturation as to how much saturation you want. You can control that. You can control the hue. There you go. And we are getting very, very close. Now, if you want to match even more, you can just make it a little brighter and then match it. Possibly, create a curves adjustment layer. Also have that. And then you can, make it brighter, match it with that of Harry Potter. But then again, we're not trying to create that. Have it a little bit. All right. And in here, I'm just going to have a little more saturation of that coloration so that the original saturation, the original color decreases. Possibly something like this. There you go. All right. Now, let's just take the Harry Potter to the left-hand side. There you go. And now we have gotten much, much closer. Now overall, I feel we can just add a little bit of contrast. So create another curves adjustment layer and then just add a little more contrast in the dark areas like this, a little more punch. There you go. And have a look at it. Interesting, isn't it? Now at this point, I would highly recommend that we go and take a break and then get back because we might miss something. And now when I get back at it, I feel that the skin can use a little bit of yellow. So we can create one more curves adjustment layer and just go to the blue channel and just decrease it by a slight bit. Add a little yellow. But as we do that, it also adds a little bit of green to it. So we can go to the greens and then just decrease it slightly. That adds a little magenta. And there you go. It just adds a little more. And now you can just add an overall brightness by going to the RGB. With the help of the hand, you can just increase the brightness of the area that needs a little more brightness. And then you can control the contrast, the overall contrast here. And then you can just keep it on the face. That's up to you, or wherever you want to keep it, like this. And then we can just select the mask, press Ctrl or Command I, take the brush, white as the foreground color, and just keep it on the face. There you go. Just, makes the face pop a little. You can also paint the same on the skin, different areas. There you go. Wonderful. Let's take a look at the before and after. So here's the before, completely different style of grading. Here is the after. Now, I told you we would also learn how to add grain. Now, there are a couple ways of doing it. The easiest way is, first of all, you can just turn off the reference or just delete it. So for our convenience, I'm deleting the luminosity check layer and the reference. All right. To add grain, press Ctrl-Shift-N, Command-Shift-N to bring the new layer dialog box, and then choose the blend mode overlay and check fill with overlay neutral color. Hit OK. And then go to filter, convert for smart filters, hit OK so that you can change the value of noise later. Go to filter, noise, and then add noise. Now you can create an action for this, that's up to you. So you can add as much noise you want, uniform or Gaussian, monochromatic or color, that's up to you. So I'm going to add some monochromatic noise. I'm going to make it uniform, hit OK. You can also have it Gaussian, that's up to you. Different people should choose different ones, so you can just pick yours, see what looks good to you. And then this noise looks too fine, so it needs some blurring. So let's go to filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur. So about 0.5, 0.6 looks all right in this case, according to the resolution. And now noise is not something you see in the bright areas. When you take a photo with high ISO or ISO, some people say ISO. When you take a photo with a very high ISO, you would have noticed that when you take a photo with a high ISO, you would notice that the noise usually stays in the shadows. So double click on the right hand side of the layer. Let's take it away from the highlights. Keep a little on the highlights. By using the same technique, hold the Alt key or the Option key, click to break the slider, make the transition smoother, and take it away from the bright area. See, it just goes away. And from here, you can just decrease the overall opacity of it and choose how much of the noise you want. So you can have a little bit, you can have more, that's up to you. So 60 seems to be natural. All right, that's one way of adding noise. So let's name it Noise Technique 1. Technique number 2 also starts with the same steps, Ctrl-Shift-N, Command-Shift-N, blend mode to overlay, fill with overlay neutral color. Now gray is the color which, if chosen with the blend mode overlay, gets hidden because overlay is a blend mode which hides everything that is 50% gray. Now let's go to filter and then convert for smart filters, hit OK. And then this time let's go to filter, blur gallery. This is one of those features which are made for something else. Imagine a situation where you have just blurred the background. And then what happens is that when you do that, let's say the subject has a lot of noise, but the background that you blurred in Photoshop, not in camera, it doesn't have any noise. So to compensate for that, we can add some noise in there. And there's a hidden noise feature inside of Blur Gallery to compensate for it. So this is made for something else, but we are using it in a different way. Let's go to Blur Gallery and then let's choose Field Blur. Let's add a random amount of blur. It's just a plain gray layer, so you're not going to see any changes there. The important thing here is that just go to Noise and work on the noise, that's all. So you can work on the amount of noise. So you can increase it right here. So in my opinion, it creates a more natural noise. And even if it doesn't, because I've compared it, it's a very little difference you can notice. Even if it doesn't, this gives you a lot more control, like amount, size, roughness. You can also choose how much color you want in the noise. So let's have the maximum amount. You can also control the size. All right. You can also control how rough you want your noise to be. And then you can also choose how much color you want your noise to have. So a little bit of that and hit OK. And now you can also take it away from the highlights by double clicking on the right hand side of the layer and holding the Alt key or the Option key, breaking it apart and taking it all the way apart just like this. So that is noise number 2. So these are two techniques, noise number 1 and noise number 2. It's up to you as to which one you want to choose. I encourage you to experiment with both and see which one you like. Sometimes the differences are so less that I just use the first technique and get done with it. Anyway, let's move on to our second example, and in this example we will use the more traditional method like curves and hue saturation to match the color grading, because the neural filters will not always work. It just won't. This time it did. It's not necessary that it will work all the time, but it's just one click. You can give it a try anyway. Moving on to our second example, here we just want to match the skin tone of this Harry Potter with that of this lady. If you look at reference number 2, we just cannot match the background. It's a completely different background. And in here, if we try to do that neural filter thing, let's make a copy of that. Let's go to filter, neural filters. It probably will just not work no matter what we do. So let's just turn on color transfer and let's go to custom. Let's choose reference 2. I think this was it. And let's see. Just goes greenish. It just doesn't match. Let's try RGB. Still, it doesn't match. You can, spend all day trying to play with hue and all, but still, it just makes more sense to do it the traditional way with curves and hue saturation. So let's go ahead and delete this. And first of all, let's turn on the reference and create a luminosity check layer by creating a solid color adjustment layer, gray, 0 saturation, and change the blend mode to color. All right, let's go ahead and match the brightness. For that, we're going to bring Harry Potter right here. All right, so that we can zoom in and work properly. Okay, now let's create a curves adjustment layer. Make sure whatever you do below the reference so that the reference doesn't get affected as we apply the adjustment layers. Let's create a curves adjustment layer. And now let's just look at the bright areas. The bright areas here are a little dark. So we're gonna take the hand right here and just bring the brights down. All right, they're matching. The dark areas are darker, so we're gonna make them darker as well. But again, the lighting is different. We don't have to make them completely darker. So just there are these shadow areas which needs to be brightened up a little bit. All right, there you go. This looks pretty nice, and if you look at it overall, it kind of matches. It doesn't match that much because the lighting is of course different, and we don't want to go extreme with it, but it's mostly matching. Now let's turn off the luminosity check layer, and let's just bring the reference right here. The colors are obviously not matching. We need to take care of that. Now, the very first thing here as we do that is that the saturation and the coloring just goes haywire. So let's create a hue saturation adjustment layer and decrease the overall saturation. So let's decrease it to about, let's go for -20 for now. Later we'll see what changes it needs. All right, now let's match the color. We're going to create another curves adjustment layer here, and we can bring back this right here and come back to curves and have a look. The highlights have a little yellow in them. So we will go to the blue channel and just take down the blues in the highlights. All right, we're getting closer. But if you look at the extreme highlights, they also have a little green in them, but only the extreme highlights. So let's go to greens and increase them in the extreme highlights, but only have it, increased in the extreme highlights, not in these areas, not in all of these areas. So have them normal, but only in extreme highlights we can have a little bit of the greens. Okay, there you go. So it's mostly matching. And if you look at it, can we say it's pretty much done? Well, in the shadows, it is becoming a little too greenish. So let's just take the greens down here in the shadows. Okay, shadows are a little bit yellowish as well. So let's go to the blue channel and let's decrease the blues here. There you go. And it is pretty much matching. Let's turn this off and we are pretty much done. But if you look at it, the body is a little brighter and the face is a little darker, and the face is pretty much matching with that of Harry Potter. So how do we go about that? Well, let's create a curves adjustment layer, pretty simple, and just make the body a little darker and add a little contrast to that as well. With the help of the hand, let's just take this area back up. I'm sorry about that. Let's just reset everything. Keep it like this, and this dark area, let's take it down. So it just kind of matches that a little more with that of the face. Now, we didn't want to apply it to the face. So first of all, let's mask in just the subject. So you can just keep the subject layer turned on. By the way, the way to make a layer solo is holding the Alt key or the Option key and then click on the eye, and only that layer is turned on now. Now let's make a selection the same way we did with the first example. Clicking on select subject. Now hold the Alt key or the Option key, click back on the eye, and everything will turn back on. Select the mask, and first let's fill it with black. By making sure the foreground color is black, we pressed X to toggle between the foreground and the background colors. And Alt backspace, Option delete, press Ctrl or Command D to deselect. Now select the mask, press Ctrl or Command I to invert it so that it's only applied to the subject. Now, we only want to apply it on the body and not the head. Press Ctrl or Command G and then click on the mask button. Now here we're going to create a gradient, the same way we did with the previous technique. All right, there you go. So here's the before, here's the after. And now you can come back here and just match it even more according to your preference. So there you go, it's matching even more. So that's how I would do it. Now, it is not always necessary that you're going to stop here. From here, you can take it forward and it doesn't have to exactly match the cinematic scene. You can just color grade it so that it looks good on this image. So from here, you can also go back to hue saturation and decrease or increase the saturation and see what works better for you. So in this case, I would actually increase the saturation a little bit to -16 and it looks better to me. Now overall, if you feel all of this is too much, you can select the first adjustment, hold the Shift key, select the last adjustment, press Ctrl or Command G and decrease the overall opacity. So for me, 89, 88, let's keep it 86 to be on the safer side. And here's the before, very plain. Here's the after, that warm Harry Potter Hogwarts dinner candlelight color grading. So that's how to approach cinematic color grading or any color grading style for that matter in Photoshop. When we say cinematic color grading, it is just hard to define what style because movies just play with colors and try bazillions of styles. So we cannot just categorize one or two colors and styles as cinematic color grading. It's just not possible. If you use this approach, my friend, you can just create any color grading style, recreate any style that you like, whether it's from another photographer that you follow or a movie scene that you watched yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.